Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. It feels so good to be back. And so, before we get started, I want to briefly explain the title of the episode today. This is Home Now. So, this is Home Now. It shows the title for this episode because that is the working title for my book that I'm hoping to publish in the not too distant future, where I tell my story of growing up in Austria and then building building a life here in the US while working through childhood trauma and pursuing this path of becoming the person that I'm meant to be. And there's two different reasons why I thought this would be an appropriate title for this first episode coming back. So first of all, I've been thinking during this break, I've been thinking more about my writing and how I really want to share more of my writing online and with listeners here. So I've been thinking about ways of doing that, and I'll keep you posted on that because that is something I'm very excited about, particularly as the writing really helps me navigate and process everything going on. So I'm going to be sharing more about that in the not too distant future. Another reason why this title felt so appropriate is since I am from Europe, I still have Austrian citizenship. A lot of people ask me, with everything going on right now in the US, are you planning on going back to Europe? And my response to that is no, California. And obviously, we live in very scary times, and it's tragic times here in the US, around the world, with everything going on. It's a tragic time for humanity. And so people keep asking me, with everything going on in the US right now, are you going to go back to Europe soon? And I always tell people, no, California is my home now. This is where my life is. So I have no plans of going back to Europe. This is home now. And I know we have some international listeners, so just to give you a little bit of background and context. And obviously, I want to say again, I know the situation is difficult around the world, but from my perspective, living here in the US, everyone's the people around me, everyone's very triggered, very upset, very sad. It's a very difficult time for everyone. No one knows what's going to happen the next day. Me and my friends, we constantly say to each other, we're just going to take it one step at a time. And that's what I am really trying to do, and other people are trying to do. I've had a few different conversations with friends who said, "Oh, I've been crying so much." And I've been crying a lot too, because what we're seeing happening in the country and the world, these are tragic times. And I tell my friends it's normal to be upset about this. We are supposed to be upset about this. There's no way to bypass what's going on. And I'm a super spiritual person, and there's days when I can really hang on to my strength and courage and hang on to that vision of the new world that we're creating. But then there's other days where I'm really feeling this dark night, that this collective dark night of the soul, and where I just feel a lot of grief and sadness over what we're seeing in the country and in the world. So yeah, it is normal. So I also want to tell you, it is normal to be upset and sad because these are tragic times, and there's no way to minimize that or bypass that. And I'm a super optimistic person, and I do really believe that we will build a better world going forward. But right now, but as this old world is dying, it is normal and human to feel grief and sadness over what we're seeing in the world. And the last half a year, it's been super challenging. And there were times for me where I told friends, okay, I'm looking into moving to Canada because I'm not sure I can do this. But then I have conversations with my friends. I go out on a really nice hike or talk to neighbors. And then I'm reminded again, this is home now. And I really don't want to leave. So I've been taking this break for the last several weeks to process everything going on in the country and in the world. Obviously, that is a continuing process and never ends. But I also, and I will share more about that in future episodes, but I also had a period of intense inner work around emotional abandonment, emotional neglect, and processing some childhood experiences around that. And that's really been a process for the last several years. But since last year, and especially over the last couple of weeks, a lot of stuff came up that I really had to sit with and process in order to move forward in a healthier way. So that process is continuing, but going through going through this period of intense inner work, I feel like I'm coming back to the podcast with more positive energy. And it does feel great to be back. During this time of going inwards, I've also thought a lot about where I want to take the podcast and what the next steps are. And there were times of a lot of intense doubt where I thought, is the podcast even helpful right now? But I'm a big believer in synchronicities. And then some synchronicities showed up in my world and in my life that I really considered as a sign to move forward. So I received a few messages online from about the podcast. And again, as I've said in previous episodes, your messages mean so much to me. Thank you so much. And during this particular time where I had doubt about continuing the podcast, it was super helpful to hear from you and give me your thoughts on the podcast, because that encouraged me to go back to recording to the podcast. I also had a conversation with someone in my neighborhood who told me they listened to the podcast. And I just really want to say thank you for your messages of encouragement and for checking in. It really means a lot to me. And as always, love your messages and never hesitate to reach out to me because I really appreciate it. And during this time of going inwards, I've also been thinking and reflecting on the focus of the podcast and decided to shift the focus a little bit. Obviously, we're still going to be talking about topics related to personal growth and self-help, but really it's about my soul-seeking journey, and I wanted to have that focus more on the spiritual side of things. And I also feel like this shift in focus allows us to talk more about this shift in society, this huge shift in society that we're seeing in the world, and how we can do our part to contribute to this new earth that we're creating. Because I do feel like oftentimes the life coaching and personal growth space is so focused on the individual that we don't talk enough about how we can take our individual empowerment to create a more just and more humane world. So I really wanna talk about that connection more on the podcast, because from a spiritual perspective and my perspective, we are here to do our part to create a better world going forward. So I think it's important to discuss that on the podcast too. How can we shine our own light to create a better and more just world? So again, really excited to be back. I've been thinking a lot about some of the topics that I want to bring in as we're back with the podcast. I recently talked to a friend and they were like, "You're so good at manifesting. You should really talk more about that in your work." So I'm planning to do that. We have other topics lined up. I also want to talk more about leaning into the seasons of our life, because taking this break from the podcast, I realized that and I've talked about it on the podcast, I've realized once again how hard it is for me to take a break and feel okay not producing and creating. So as I've mentioned, I think on a podcast before, I'm a very type A personality. I always feel like I have to produce, create, do, and if I don't actively produce, I sometimes struggle with a sense of self-worth, and then I need to remind myself, and I constantly have to remind myself we're human beings, not human doings. And in this capitalistic world, this stage of late stage capitalism, I think we're all feeling the pressure to obviously bring money in and make a living. And it can be really challenging to find those times to take a break. But it's so important, especially during these crazy times we're living in, to find those moments of rest and processing everything going on. And so I've also been thinking a lot about leaning into different seasons of my life. I also want to do a podcast episode on that and talk more about how rest and taking those times for self care, how we can really use those times to push back on capitalism and reclaiming our self worth and our humanness. And for me, the last several weeks was definitely a winter period of my life. And while I wanted to produce more, create more, I think this time was also really important, not only in terms of taking care of myself, but I'm also coming back way more refreshed, with a refreshed perspective, and doing this with more positive energy and a higher frequency to send out. So we're definitely going to be talking more about those seasons of our lives as well. We have more awesome interviews coming up. Super excited about that. And as I've mentioned before, I also want to find more creative ways to share my writing with you. So I was really inspired. I recently went to a Get Mortified event with friends. And so Mortified is an event where people share entries from their childhood diaries and embarrassing stories from their childhood. And it seems like a really cathartic thing to share that with the world. So that inspired me to find more ways to share my writing with you. If you're based in the Bay Area, I'm also thinking about doing some open mic nights and share some of my writing that way. So I will keep you posted on that. I'm also hoping to find more ways to share my writing online, and super excited about that. I'll be keeping this episode pretty short, but I'll be back with weekly episodes. So grateful for your patience with me. I really hope everyone's taking really good care of themselves during these challenging times in the world. My heart is with everyone suffering and who's feeling the pressure of this collective dark night of the soul. My heart's with everyone who's anxious right now and who's grieving the old world that we're saying goodbye to. I know these are really challenging times, and community is everything right now, and friendship and community and love is everything right now. And I do really consider this podcast and you listeners as part of my community. So thank you so very much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much to everyone who sent me a message during my little break. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm so appreciative of each and every one of you. Again, if you have any feedback on the show, or if there's any topics that you would like me to talk about, please don't hesitate to reach out. I always greatly appreciate all of your messages. And with that, I'll sign off for today. Thank you again so much. Sending out my love to everyone. We're in this together and we'll make it through this together. Sending out my love to you. Thank you so much.